everybody. Welcome to Missouri Star Live. I am Misty Doan, and I am pleased to be here with you on this beautiful Tuesday. I do want to acknowledge, in light of everything going on in the world, that we just hope that we can be a beacon of positivity and happiness and inspiration. And so we thank you for spending some time with us. Thank you for being here, and hopefully you enjoy the project that we have today. As always, let's see where we have some people tuning in from. Donna from Florida, Brenda from West Virginia, thank you guys so much. Debbie says she's finally catching live from Central Arkansas. Thank you for being here with us, Debbie. Christy from Arizona, I hope you guys are having a wonderful day and you're all staying safe and well. So as you can see, we have this beautiful quilted panel hanging behind us, and it says there are always flowers for those who wish to see them, which seems like appropriate messaging at this time. But you may be thinking, oh, that makes a lovely whole cloth quilt, which it does. But what I'm actually here to show you is that we have created a quilt pattern so that this is actually the backing of the quilt. So I'm going to take a minute and flip this around for you. Really quick.
And Misty, tell us what you're using to hold that quilt up, because it's a pretty cool product.
We have super strong magnets and a bar up there that makes it possible for us to hang it up for you. So hopefully I can make this work okay. They're very strong, as you can see. And so here, I'm totally off center. You know, it is what it is. It's totally fine. But so this is a quilt that I've designed, and I've called it Garden Rose, and we do have a pattern available for it. And this beautiful fabric is called Brightly Blooming by Laura Muir of Create Joy for Moda Fabrics. And it is absolutely stunning. It's kind of got this look of watercolor, which is so, so beautiful and so relevant these days. And I just love all the colors that she's put together. Now, one thing to keep in mind though, this collection is not available in pre-cuts, which at first can kind of set things off, and we're like, oh, what do we do? So I actually designed this pattern to be yardage friendly. It's still super easy, super fast, and doesn't require a whole lot. So let's talk just a little bit about what you're going to need to make this. You're going to need 3/4 of a yard of your main print fabric, which is what we put in this large stripe running down the quilt here. And then you're going to need a 1/2 yard of 6 coordinating prints, and those are what are going to make these stripes running horizontally. And then you're also going to need a 1/2 yard of background fabric, which is going to create these sashing strips that you see here. So super, super easy. And then as far as the panels go, there are actually 2 different ones available. So you can see here, this is the one I showed you. It's called, is it Positive Vibes? I'm not sure how they want that pronounced, but you get it. It's Positive Vibes.
Positive Vibes with the posies.
With the posies, that's right. And then Rosy Loved, which is this, this more pink one. It's beautiful. They're both awesome, and they both measure 56 by 77. And so we've kind of designed our quilt to fit these panels. That's the size we were aiming for. So to get started, remember you have 6 prints that are all a 1/2 yard each. And so there are more than 6 prints in this collection. I picked the 6 that I wanted to use, and you could do the same with whatever line you're using. And then what I did is I went ahead and cut each of those 1/2 yard cuts into 4-inch strips. And from 5 of them, you're going to need 4 strips. Make sure I'm telling you right. 1, 2, 3. Yes, 5 you're going to need 4, and from 1 of them you're going to need only 3. And that's going to total 23 strips running down. And I've gone ahead and I've sewn those all together here. And you do want to make sure that you occasionally switch which side you're starting on when you're sewing your strips, so you don't get any waving or just kind of bowing in your strips. But I really didn't have any trouble. Just take your time, don't stretch, and you'll end up with a big piece like this, where we have 23 strips all sewn together like so. And I've got it folded in half here because now what we're going to do is we're going to actually trim this, and we're going to make some cuts so that we can get this little accent strip that's over here. You have any questions, Liz?
Yeah, so we stripped these together. So even though they're larger than Jelly Roll strips,
yes,
right, they're 4-inch strips, you piece them together just like you would Jelly Rolls. So you're gonna go back and forth a little bit to not get that bowing.
Exactly.
But basically it's the same. You're just strip piecing
this
whole
bit wider. Instead
this whole thing together.
2.5, we're working with 4 inches because it seemed easier that way. Since we had the yardage, I didn't want to make a bunch of small cuts. I decided to make some larger cuts so that it would come together quicker. So let me just show you what I did here and move this out of the way so I can have some working room. So when you're folding this, your first instinct is going to be to line up all of the seams so that you know it's straight, which makes sense, but it actually will make it more difficult to cut. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the bottom of my quilt, and I'm going to kind of offset this just a little bit, but I'm going to try and make sure that the spacing along the bottom and along this side, I don't know if you guys can see here, but I tried to keep one side when I was sewing my strips together all starting at the same point. This side here is all very uneven, as you know, kind of go back and forth, but this way I knew I had at least one side that was a little more straight. And so now I've offset this here, and what this does is it offsets the bulk of the seam. And so then as I fold this, I'm not trying to cut through 4 or 6 seams at one time. They're offset, and it makes it much easier to do. So that's what I've done here. We're just going to make sure this is laid nice and flat, and we're going to do the same thing again, pulling it over, and I can come back to kind of that first reference point and just make sure that we don't have, you want to take your time, make sure you don't have any rumples. Like I'm getting one there, so I'm going to put this back out, smooth it again, and make sure that I'm not going to get any folds, because that's where we're going to have problems when we go to cut this. So make sure you've pressed your top nice and flat, and just take your time on this step, because this is where you really don't want mistakes. And you can see here I'm feeling this, and I can tell now just with the touch of my hands that this is nice and smooth and everything is offset exactly where I want. So I'm going to use the mat just as a guide to make sure this is straight, and I'm going to make my cut to cut off my selvage.
And when you were pressing, Misty, did you care which way these were going?
I didn't really too much. I kind of, to be honest, I waited to press until the very end, and so I really just ran my iron. You know, I held it and pressed it all the same direction, but it's not really going to matter because you're not going to have intersecting seams, and so it doesn't make a big difference which way your seams are going. And so now that I've got this all square, I'm just going to line up my ruler here using the straight edge, and I'm going to cut off the selvage on this side. And because I know this side is straighter than this side, I'm going to go ahead and use it to cut off this piece here. And I'm pretty sure I cut off 6 inches. It's been a while since I actually made this. Let me just make sure. Yes, you're going to cut a 6-inch wide strip. So we're just going to move our ruler over here, and we're going to check and make sure we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches. And by doing it this way, we don't have to reposition our fabric. Everything's staying exactly where we want it. There's that piece there, and we can set this aside for now. And then we can carefully slide this over and trim off our other side. This one can look a little trickier since things are jagged, but it's really just the exact same concept. We're going to make sure that we're staying as square as possible, making sure we don't have anything that feels like it shouldn't be there. Got one spot there, but that's just a seam that's pressed itself open, so I'm actually in good shape. And then we're going to come back here, And we're going to trim off our selvage again.
And as you guys can see on the close-up, the seams are offset, and what that means is that they're not right on top of each other.
Exactly.
So that makes it easier to cut through all those layers without having the seams rumble as you cut.
We don't want a bunch of bulk all stacked up. We want this to be as easy as possible to cut through. And so I've given myself plenty of space to make sure I don't have to go back and worry about any selvage being in there. From what I'm looking at here, I think I got them all. And I would recommend that you check this before you unfold it, all the work. You should be able to see your selvages on the piece that you've cut off, and I can see all of them there and bits of the proper fabric. So I think we are now in good shape to start sewing. So this comes together really easily. Now all you're going to do is just sew these in strips again, going the other way. So you have your large stripe segment to a sashing piece, and this is a 1.5 inch strip. So I've got that here, and I've actually, it's two 1.5 inch strips that I've seamed. So it's by the width of the fabric. There's one seam in the middle. And so we're just gonna go ahead and sew that on. So I'm gonna do that.
Okay. And Misty, while you start sewing that on, we'll recap the line of fabric in the description section. It's called Brightly Blooming.
Yes, Brightly Blooming. From Create Joy Studios, I believe is the name, and it's for Moda Fabrics, and we do have that available here at Missouri Star.
And we've used yardage because this doesn't have a pre-cut.
That's right.
But you've also only selected 6 fabrics for this section and then 1 fabric for that large strip down the middle. So there's 7 fabrics plus the little white strip that you're sewing on now.
Exactly. And so this could also be, you know, if you have some favorite fabrics that you've been holding on to, this is a great project for these large prints that you don't necessarily want to cut up. It really highlights it well and shows it off. And so I think that's a great opportunity. And so I just want to show you guys here, we're just going to zoom down this side, and we're going to stop, reposition our fabric, and line up our strip and keep going.
And while you're sewing, Misty, there's a couple comments I want to share. So JM Baird 49 says, when I do a fold like that second one, I lay my 24-inch ruler along the bottom part just below the fold to help keep the fabric from pleating when I fold it back toward me. That's a great tip.
Great tip.
And then Copper is asking, is there any tips for sewing a big section, or not sewing, pressing a big section like that large finished piece on a pressing surface when you have all those seams?
I just work kind of in columns when I'm pressing my big quilts, and so I'll work, you know, starting on one side, and I'll work all the way up the quilt, then I'll move it over, work all the way up the quilt and move it over, and then I usually will start on the top to try and make sure I don't have any tucks or pleats that aren't where I want them, so I know that my blocks or my piecing looks good. And then once that's done, I'll go ahead and flip it over and double check it from the back side just to make sure everything's laying nicely before it goes to quilting. Hopefully that made sense, but I just kind of work in columns along the quilt, however big my ironing surface might be. With a big size ironing board, you can usually do about half the quilt at a time, and then either flip it and work the other direction or just slide it over. So good question.
Good tips, thank you.
Yeah.
And Helga noticed we're using that fold away ruler.
We are, and it's pretty handy. And to be totally honest, I'm using that one today because I couldn't find the other one, and sometimes these things happen. So we just got to make do. But it works just fine. It's a wonderful ruler, and if you're on the go, it's nice that it folds up. All right. We're about to that halfway point. And I know that this is pretty straightforward, but I just wanted to show you guys how I do it, give you some visualizations of it actually at the sewing machine. So we're not just talking at you today. So I'm just going to keep lining up my fabric. And you'll notice I'm not tugging on this strip. I'm just letting it lay naturally right on top of this so that I don't get any waves or puckering. And I also like to keep, excuse me, the bulk of my quilt down. I tend to have better luck that way. I do the same thing when I'm attaching borders. I keep my quilt down because that way I tend to not have trouble with waves. We are almost to the end here.
And Vicki Pace, the name of this pattern is Garden Rose. Yes. And folks, yes, this would be great in lots of colors. We've used the brightly blooming, and especially because we wanted to coordinate with the panel that we're going to show you we're using for the backing. But as you're pointing out, this would look great in lots of colors. Any pre-cut you have that you don't want to cut up, those great big patterns, that beautiful large scale prints that you don't want to cut up. This would be great as a quilt of valor. This
yes,
would be great
absolutely.
As lots of different quilts.
Absolutely. And so you can see here I have just sewn all the way down that, and now I would actually use my quilt to go ahead and trim off the excess. This is one of my favorite little tips, and so I'll just take my ruler back here, so I only have the big one out right now, and I just line it back up again, keeping my edges straight and square, making sure things are where they should be, and then I can trim off that excess, and that one's ready to go, and then we can do the same thing on the other end. And I do this with each step, each strip that I add to the quilt, and we'll get to that accent strip here next. Right, that one's ready to go, and then we would just press that back, or if you're like me, since the seams are intersecting, you can go ahead and add the next strip. And so that is our accent fabric, and for this quilt I've used this beautiful print. I just think it's so pretty and vibrant. And remember, you're going to need 3/4 of a yard of this, and we're going to cut that into 12-inch strips. And so it's 2 12-inch strips by the width of fabric out of your 3/4 yards of fabric, and then we seam those together just like we did the sashing strips. And so just like that, we would sew this one on next. And so you can see it's very straightforward, and the only thing that I did besides just sewing it straight across is on this accent piece here, I flipped it 180 degrees. So whichever print I started with at the top here is at the bottom on the other side. And so that's really the only thing. I just wanted it to have a little bit of movement and look a little scrappy, but you could also keep the same print and it would kind of run through that. So it's totally up to you, whatever you want to do there. So let's go ahead. Should we flip this around and talk about the...
Yes, but tell me, we have a question on, can you show me where you seamed the large print? Because I think people sometimes get nervous that that's going to show.
It's right here, but it just hides. I don't think you really need to worry about that at all. So I did not match it. I did not match the print. I did, hopefully this makes sense, but when I cut the strips, so the bottom of the selvage, I lined up with the top of the next piece, so the orientation of the print was kind of going the same way. Hopefully you can see that, you know, as these flowers move, they're kind of oriented the same way. But other than that, the seam runs right here, and your eye just totally loses it. You don't have to worry about it at all. That's a great question, though. I'm glad you pointed that out. So let's flip this around. You want to help me, Cole? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Cole's not quite as tall as me.
That's right.
So he has to reach. All right. See if we can get it more centered. Any better that time?
Maybe.
It's not bad.
There we go. Perfect. And so again, we use this beautiful oversized panel that is part of the collection as the backing. And this was so fun to do. And I love that you kind of get 2 quilts for 1 out of this. The only thing that we had to do in order to send it to be quilted was, even though you don't see borders on here, we actually did have to add borders for quilting. And then once the quilting was done, you trim them off. So you don't necessarily need that border fabric to match your quilt because it's going to disappear in the quilting. But we did use, let me make sure I have this right, 1.5 yards of fabric, because we put 5-inch borders on either side of the panel and 7-inch borders on the top and the bottom, just to allow for quilting. And then, like I said, once it's all trimmed up, it's good to go.
Yeah, so just want to reiterate that fabric can be your ugliest fabric you never want to see again.
Exactly.
Because you're just going to trim it off again.
Exactly.
Or it can also just be reused because it's nice big fat border so that quilting can happen.
Exactly. And if you're worried that it maybe isn't going to trim up exactly right, then I would go ahead and use background fabric that would match this and just use that to go around it so that it will kind of just disappear when you do trim it. And that way it'll be a little bit more forgiving, because I was a little panicked myself. I'll be honest. I'm like, is this actually going to work? It worked beautifully. Our quilters here at Missouri Star did a fabulous job. I love it. This pattern, I believe, is called Botanical Blossoms, which I think is just perfect for this quilt. Turned out awesome. So thank you guys for doing such a wonderful job. Any other questions, Liz?
Can we see the panels again? It looked like you had 2 colors.
Absolutely. So this one that I used here is this Positive Vibes, and it says there are always flowers for those who wish to see them. And then we also have this Rosy Love that says you are so loved, with this bouquet of roses at the bottom. They are so, so cute. Love it.
And folks are asking, how do I get this pattern? There's a link in the description to all the materials we used today, including this pattern.
Yes. I hope you guys enjoy it. And it's really easy. I whipped it up in an afternoon, and hopefully it makes you think of yardage in a new way. Just keep those big, beautiful prints together and let them all kind of work together in one magic quilt. You know, now my stripes are on the other side, but I just think it's so fun to let all these beautiful prints sort of shine instead of cutting them up sometimes. So thank you so much. We hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we will see you soon.